Welcome to Maybe I'm Just Not Getting It. I'm your host, Robert Davis. I appreciate you all tuning in. Follow me on Instagram, RTD underscore III, Facebook, Robert Davis, Robert Trey Davis III, I think. Like I said, appreciate y'all tuning into the show. So, on today's episode, what I want to talk about is toxic, not toxic masculinity, but masculinity in general. Just kind of the hyper focus of how it's being assessed in culture right now, because it's a hot topic. It's been a hot topic for a while, and you can scroll probably, and maybe it might just be my algorithm, maybe it's not y'all's, but you can't scroll too far without or anything without coming across it. You can't come across too much media without something telling you what what's either an issue about being a man, or what's right about being a man, or a good example, bad example, so on and so forth. So I mean, I think because of that, because there's so many different opinions and definitions on what masculinity is, what it should be, what makes it toxic, it's important to talk about it. And I think also because a lot of men have exhibited toxic or harmful habits, then and the impact of that can be felt by so many people or can be attested to by so many people, then that's also caused a hyper focus on it. And so with that, I just wanted to start by reading a quote that's actually it's on my Instagram. Not to plug it twice in the same day, but or the same episode, but it's on my Instagram, in my bio, and it's been there for some years now. But I mean, I think it really speaks to what I mean to this episode, quite honestly, and it's from Bob Marley. It states that the greatness of a man is not in how much wealth he acquires, but in his integrity and his ability to affect those around him positively. I think that could not have been said better. I believe, as a man, you're judged by how you treat those around you, what your priorities are, your integrity, what your responsibility, how you address and how you take care of your responsibilities. I think masculinity is much more an intrapersonal type of assessment and an intrapersonal set of skills or values or schema than what a lot of the culture says it is and they put a lot of kind of your external type of values on it, which I don't think really have much actual credence in the conversation. Because at the end of the day, I don't think masculinity is defined by what other men or women, quite honestly, think about what or expect you to be or should be. It's much more an interpersonal type of assessment than that. And I mean, also, I think it's also really important, just from a kind of conceptual sense to understand that masculinity should be kind of treated as a societal concept in the same sense that femininity is. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. I have a hard time saying some words because of my accent. And it should be kind of viewed in that same light where you have the space to assess and criticize for the ability to improve while not demonizing and attacking it. Like because it itself is not the issue. And so, I think why this matters is that, or why this is important, why this topic really matters is that a lot of men, young and old, which is really sad if you think about it, have insufficient or incomplete ideas about what masculinity is or what a man is. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, right? Um, there's first, I don't think there's enough positive male role models. I both in one everyday life and two in the media. Like for me personally, I can say I have positive male role models in my life. I can say my father, my uncle. I can say my cousins. I mean I can my godfathers. I can speak to positive male role models I came up around, and also I can say that there are people in culture that I've identified as a positive male role model. Whether that be past historical figures like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, whether that be current athletic figures like LeBron James, whether that be musical, like music artists like Bob Marley, I think at the same, or I mean, Bob Marley, Nipsey Hussle, J. Cole, all of them. Like, I think at the same time, there's not enough of that shown. There's a lot more negative examples because the culture focuses on that negative example. I think it's a lot hotter of a sale. And I think a lot of men take influence from the negative and not enough from the positive, just frankly because it's just not enough there. In their everyday life, they don't see it enough, or they see more men being acting in a negative light than they do in a positive light, which leads to listening to these inadequate sources, right? It leads to being misled on what masculinity is or should be. It leads to these incomplete or these asinine ideas about what you're owed or what you're entitled to as a man or how people should be acting towards you as a man, when in honesty, that's has nothing to do with it. And I think it's important for men and women both to understand that masculinity should be defined. I mean, I think you can assess, you can give your opinions and thought, but I think masculinity should be defined by men that you respect, by men that have the ability to lead, whether that's the head of your household, your business, your church, your organization, your fraternity, whatever. Like, they have the ability to lead. They handle their responsibilities in their business, and they treat people with dignity and respect. And I think if we don't do enough of listening, asking first. We don't do enough asking men that we find in those lights, but we don't do enough of listening to them about what their ideas or definitions of manhood or masculinity are. And I think we would be better off by using those examples and taking heed from them. And then I think, without trying to sound sexist about it, but I don't think I do, because I hear women say this a lot. I mean, in terms of, especially with the submission argument, that men are viewed as the leaders of society. And if you're asking somebody to follow you, if you're asking to be a leader, that means you're asking someone to follow you. And to be a leader, you have to be multiple things at once, and you have to be multiple things at once, not just for yourself, but for those that you're asking to lead you, because you can't lead them into darkness. That's the worst thing of a leader, is to lead his followers into bad situations. And when your core ideals, when your integrity, when your morals can be compromised, then you're not reliable as a leader. And if you're exhibiting toxic behaviors, then you're compromising your core values, and that's not speaking to what you should be as a man. And I think there's a difference, speaking from the leadership role of it, there's a difference between being firm in your ideals and then also being loving and empathetic and understanding of the world around you. It requires flexibility. And as a man, you have to be flexible. I mean, you have to be firm at times to provide that protection, to provide that solidity, that solid base for those around you. But then at times you also do have to be warmer. You do have to be more loving or more feeling for those that need that from you. You can't be just one thing or the other. Like, you have to be, and that's not just being a man, that's being human. Being a man is part of being human. We have to, as a human being, we have to all be these things. And, I think one thing is, I think that a large source of sorry, let me start. One reason I think this matters is that a large source of the violence historically in every day that we've come across in this country or in the world in general, the thing of sex trafficking, which I got a small rant on that I'll get to in a second, but the sex trafficking and human trafficking, crime, the increased tension, especially in the political sense, it comes from these negative these negative traits or these negative effects of masculinity, or these negative impacts of men not acting in the best light, I should say. And in order to better the world, we have to better ourselves. And we won't solve a lot of these problems until we do. And I want to use sex trafficking as the example for that. It pisses me off how this, like the whole thing of it, because sex trafficking exists mainly because powerful men want to have sex with women with no consequence and no effort and no consequence. A lot of times with younger women and minors with no effort and no consequence, and no connection. Sorry, no effort, no consequence, and no connection. So a lot of time, I mean, you see all of these efforts and all these efforts and organizations trying to fight sex trafficking. While the crazy thing is that like the cartels and these human traffickers and all that, they're not doing it for fun or just for the love of the game. They're doing it because there's a demand. There's a market that demands it. And so you have to ask, well, who is the market that's demanding it? The men that I just was speaking about. Most of the 9 times out of 10, it's the men I was just referring to. And so when you have, like I said, these men that want sex with women, most of the time minors with, like I said, no effort, no communication, no connection, no consequence, then you have this, and you're asking, who has the resources to even be able to do these things. Most of the time it's men in powerful situations. And then you have like the world, these organizations trying to fight this problem that is impacted by most of the time the men at the top of the organization that they work under. And it's just the wildest thing to me. Again, it kind of goes back to me, a snake eating its own tail. But yeah, sorry. It does. It's a weird thought because a lot of times, I think about an organization that might donate money to sex trafficking awareness or organization that fight it, and then the CEO is caught, with a young girl that he done paid for. But nonetheless, assessing masculinity and criticizing toxic traits is not an attack on men. I think it's important before we get into this conversation further to get to that point. And I understand why a lot of men turn off to a lot of the internet rhetoric around that's critiquing men. I do. Because a lot of it does kind of turn into an attacking or a demonizing sense of tone. But just the concept of assessing it and criticizing the bad of it is not an attack. And a lot of people have valid opinions that to be respected and to be assessed honestly with it. But again, it is important to draw the line and to understand where it kind of shifts from assessing to attacking. And when you sense that shift, then it is appropriate in my mind to cut that off or to just kind of ignore that. But to get into some examples of it, right? I think the media promotes a lot of inaccurate or incomplete ideas about what toxic masculinity is. What masculinity is, not what toxic masculinity is. I think they do that as well, but just what masculinity is in general. I think traditionally, in the media sense, the example was, somebody that was physically imposing, emotionally kind of stonewalled. I don't want to say sexually proclivious or provocative, but they generally had sex with a lot of women, or they easily attracted women, I should say. And the other half, it might not be this particular character, or the other part was like the guy with the work till you die mentality. I think for a long time that was kind of the two different examples that were put out to say this is what masculinity is in the traditional media back in the day. And I think, those two ideas were very incomplete and very base modelish for a lot of men. They just kind of said, "Oh, that's what I am." I had a lot of cousins that would tell me, when I talked to them, that their idea of like what of what their life is I work for my family and that's it. Like they have nothing else outside of that. And while again, I think that's priorities, and priorities and objectives to be respected. I don't think that in itself is masculinity alone either. Just because you provide for your family don't make you a man. It is a responsibility of a man, but women provide for their families too. Does that make them a man because of it? No. So it's more to it because of that. And then I think one thing that the media nowadays does a lot, which I think is to a degree disingenuous, even though I think it started genuinely, was the thing of saying the seek therapy thing, right? Yeah, I think it's nowadays thrown more around as an ingenuine insult than an actual comment. And I think what a lot of guys feel like, especially when they're not really educated on this subject or really caring about the subject, is that they feel like therapy, in the sense of I am seeing a therapist or I have talked to a therapist or I did some sort of therapy, has solved their issues, when that's not the real thing. And just because you've done that, or even with our culture thinking that just because you sought therapy that will fix you. No, I mean it requires a lot more intrapersonal work than that. And sometimes therapy can help, sometimes it won't. And it's important to just understand that, and understand that, just telling men to seek therapy won't always be the answer and isn't always a good answer. And one group I wanted to talk about is the incel group. I talked about this in the last episode about social media, the involuntarily celibate group, right? The guys that feel like, that in a paraphrase sense, that women be on their high horse, and that, if they would get off, that they need to get off of it because I suppose these men feel like they're owed them, or that they would be more successful with women if women weren't on their high horse with unrealistic expectations. I don't think that's, and they can't get women because women have unrealistic expectations of men. I don't think that's the case. Not to sound insulting, but there's been women that have been sleeping with shit men for years. And that's been since the dawn of time, so that's not going to stop. You know what I mean? But like, I don't really think that's the case. I do think that the concept of an incel is kind of your peak toxicity. I think what they preach in terms of this concept of having this strong distaste, I'm not going to say hate women, but a very strong opinion against women, against women's success, against them having happiness and pride in themselves, I guess, and not making themselves all about, I guess, that guy that feels like they should be, that should be wanting them. I think that's, there's nothing masculine about that. And I think that's a very weak mind state to have. I think it's a very wallowing in self-pity type of mind state. That again, just one of the, in my opinions, the biggest traits of non-masculinity that you can find. But I think it's very concerning because that community is growing, and that community's voice is growing. I think the current political environment has also given, and culture environment gives a lot of platform to that. And I fear where that goes with more young men feeling like feeling like that their lack of success or their lack of romantic success comes from women tripping or women not acting right and not them being better to be more presentable. You know what I mean? Or they have more of a chance. But that's, I guess, probably could be a different topic for a different episode, The alpha bro stereotype, the alphas. First off, there's no such thing in my mind as an alpha and a beta. I think that's because obviously masculinity can be defined and can be exemplified and presented in men of so many different walks of life, so many different physical statures, so many different religious beliefs, so many different personalities, so many different priority sets. It can be identified by so many different ways that there is no way, in a positive and a negative sense, that there is no way that you can, by a point, just say this guy's an alpha and this guy's a beta. This guy is an alpha because he's strong and this guy's a beta because he's weak. When both of them take care of their families and, are respected in their communities. I mean, and the reason I think that it's illogical to categorize men like this because it's so subjective. Because any two examples, right? Like, you can use Brock Lesnar and say Brock Lesnar is a strong, physically strong, imposing male. He has a family. He takes care of his family. He provides for his family. So you can say, okay, just in this example, he is a good example of a man, right? Then you can say Barack Obama is also a good example of a man who is, president, obviously, but he is a father figure. He is a leader to many. He is, giving motivation to many. Which one is an alpha and which one is a beta if you're comparing those two to each other? Right? Like, I think, and the reason I say they both in my mind would be alphas because they're both doing what they're supposed to do, even though they come in various forms and shapes and beliefs and sizes and everything like that. But so that, to my point of where you can't really judge it on this alpha beta scale. I think if you have to, a beta is described as somebody, again, that's not meeting that expected form of masculinity where you are, or the expectation of where you have, your integrity in place, you have your responsibilities in place, you have your priorities in place, and you have, sound morals. If you're not meeting that, then that would be my interpretation of what a beta would be. And I think that, speaking to that, the alpha bro thing is that the internet examples that are provided in the voices, like the Andrew Tates of the world, the different podcasts. I forget that the ones I see where the guys bring on these women and then demean the fuck out of them really for no reason, like to tell them that they're not doing what they need to do in order to attract the men that they want to attract, instead of just letting them go off and walk down that path by themselves and just go find the women that they want to go find. I think that they are, horrible examples that men listen to because they start with a very relatable base of having self-confidence in yourself, right? And which is positive. They start with a seed of positivity and a lot of times of self-confidence, of understanding of the pressures of men in society. And then they start adding in this thing of, and then it's also not your fault because of this, and you're also entitled because it's not your fault because of this, and you don't have to do better. It's really so-and-so's fault or this thing's fault, and really you're entitled. You should be getting this, and you are really entitled to this because you're a good man. And it kind of flows into this weird space of self-entitlement and this weird space of kind of not, I don't want to say aggression, but this weird space of anger and self-entitlement and kind of delusion that I think while a lot of young men find that suitable or a lot of men find that suitable because it again makes them feel like it's not their fault, it's just something else that's holding me back. It doesn't really allow men to really take a deep dive at a lot of intrapersonal parts of themselves. And sometimes they do tell these men, like, you need to think better about yourself and all that, but they don't, it's not in a deep enough sense. And especially when always you're saying, but and then women be tripping and then they're trying to tell men not to be men anymore and all this stuff. Like, it really gets to this kind of negative drone that you have to tune out in order and realize that these guys aren't good examples. And a lot of times these people on the internet aren't really happy in their own life. And either they're not happy in their own life or The examples that they are off screen are different than what they said on screen. Another example to speak on is the serial womanizer. I mean, I don't have to list examples for this one. I think everybody knows a guy or two. And I'm not, I mean, I understand that in today's dating field, most people are playing multiple fields, right? I get men and women. Like most people, like I'm not speaking to that degree. I'm talking about guys who kind of define themselves by their ability to either sleep with a woman or have some sort of romantic impact on a woman. Like that's how they judge themselves, or they have to be like it's kind of like what keeps them going. I mean, I know guys who really are like they're all about a girl like all the time. Not like girl crazy. Like oh I love him. Like it's like oh I gotta fuck something. I gotta get this girl. Oh yeah she bad. I'm about to hit her. Like it's like I don't know if it's boredom or if it's just like I don't want to sit alone with my thoughts or what it is. But there's guys out there that really have issues like that. And I mean I think it's first important to just note that body count doesn't speak to masculinity, right? Like the amount of women you sleep with is the amount of women that you sleep with. And if you are sexually proclivious or sexually, very high active or whatever, then you're just a sexually high active male. It doesn't mean that you're more of a man than a man that's not. It just means that you just have more sex than that man. You know what I mean? Or you just have a lot of sex, I should say. Um, and the other thing is, in speaking with a lot of women throughout my life, what I've always found is that women value discernment in the same way that men do. I think, in the sense that when men say, to women in this sense, like, oh, the amount of people that you sleep with matter to me. I don't want somebody that's ran through. I think women feel the same way. And I think a lot of women appreciate men and view that as a positive sign of masculinity when men have discernment over, the type of women that they pursue. Quite frankly, I think a lot of men would be in better situations in their life. And most men, you can probably attest to knowing a man that would be in a lot better situation in his life if he made better decisions when his dick was hard. If he thought, made better decisions and thought things out and didn't just go after, whatever woman he was going after that night. Or, if he didn't allow pussy to run his life, he would be in a lot better place. Most men know a guy like that because they either have lost money fucking with women that they shouldn't have a baby mom that hate them or dragging them down, or that they in a constant battle with, and caught some stuff, then got caught up dealing with, with some girl dealing with some dude and got in some situation or something like that. And, I think a lot of men would be better off. And I think, quite frankly, you would see the change that you would want to see in your life in terms of that romantic situation, the women that you attract, if you just had better discernment over the women that you were going after. And like I said, it's a women, I think, and in general, I think that is a positive sign of wisdom in your masculinity, is to not have to chase every broad you see. Um, and on the flip side of that, I also think that the guy that tries to be the quote unquote perfect guy that women want, in the sense of like the simp type, or the I'm trying, I'm lying to get into her pants. I'm trying to be somebody different to get into her pants type. I think that's also just as toxic. Like first off, I think to men listening, if you're single, if you're wondering how to attract, woman that is right for you, I think is simply just being, yourself, being kind, respectful, responsible for your actions. Like I said, walking through this world with integrity, with dignity, with your morals in place. And it may not be today, and it may not be tomorrow, but you will one day find the woman that is right for you. And it is important when I say that it is right for you. Like you will find a woman, because that woman she will respect you for that, and she will share similar ideals and similar values. a lot of times men are with women and they have different ideals and different values, and that's where those issues exist. Bringing it back to the man that women want type of thing. First off with the simp type of stuff, and I don't like using the word simp, but I do think it is a really a really adequate definition for the term. It isn't masculine, and women don't respect it. So I really don't understand why men do it. But it's become a culture where men are being a lot more desperate, which again is a negative form of masculinity. In my point, men aren't desperate and shouldn't be acting desperate, but men are acting very desperate, especially when it comes to women in a romantic and a sexual sense. I think the OnlyFans culture is a live, and the internet comment culture is a live thing of that. It's too many men talking about the very sexually vile things that they would do to a woman. And when I not just talking about like sexual things, like vile things they would do for a woman, like the bare minimum, like, oh, I was, and the paying for like the foot pictures and the weird things, the sniffer hair and all that sort of stuff. Like, it's a lot of that going on, in that type of simp culture, and the being kind of almost like a submissive dominatrix, not dominatrix type of thing, but y'all might get what I mean. That I just feel like is unbecoming of men, and it's part of the problem that a lot of women see. A lot of men is just having no sort of self-respect for themselves, and if you as a man don't respect yourself, then I don't understand how you could expect a woman to respect you. And if a woman don't respect you, she probably ain't gonna sleep with you. You feel what I'm saying? So, I mean, I think that's a thing. And then on the other, the part of that is the guys that lie to women and put on this facade to sleep with them is the same sense of just not being respectful to yourself or to them, because you're not telling the truth. They're believing a lie. And you shouldn't take pride in hurting women. That's not masculine. And it's not even masculine. It's not human. And then I was always taught that, if you really, and I hate to say it like this, but like the guys that had like the multiple girlfriends that was really doing it, like, I mean, not really doing, like they had like all these different girlfriends, but like the guys that like, if they really had it like that game was on point, they girls knew about each other. Like they was okay with it because them dudes was straight up with them like about it. You know what I'm saying? And I think, I mean, when you think about, a lot of times I always was taught that, guys lie to women because they were afraid that if they told them the truth, they wouldn't sleep with them or they wouldn't like them anymore. But if you have to lie to a woman to get her to sleep with you, then that's kind of a weak move to begin with. So if you're able, I mean, like if you really want to do it like that, then, if you want to show to be the top type of masculine male, then you should be able to do that without having to lie to them. And if you can do that without having to lie to them, then you really are your shit. Good shit, bro. Like, I feel it. And then one example I want to talk about, and I really struggle with whether I wanted to discuss this or not, is for y'all that don't know, I'm a member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity. A proud member. One of the greatest honors in my life is to represent the fraternity. And the reason that I wanted to speak on it was that I believe it is a great example of an organization that preaches manhood as a core principle, that preaches the values and the expectations that are required for men to be setting a high standard and a high example in this world. And, there are a lot of men that have and are leaders and positive impact makers, and of all different levels and all different factions, that represent Omega. And I think, that's a great example of it. And on the flip side of it, you've also had many of instances where there have been acts that would be described as less than that standard, whether that be, violence, the hyperaggression, the sexual violence towards women, in some sense that some members have shown that have set poor examples or less than adequate examples of what the fraternity stands for and what men should be held to of any standard, but definitely Omega men that are held to a higher standard. So I just want to speak on that for a second to talk about that because it is close to my heart for one, but for two, because in speaking of manhood, even though you were a man first, it did. I was able to take a lot from what I learned and the men that I have met before and since becoming a Q. The men that I and the Omega men that I met before and since becoming a Q. Before and since coming a Q. Sorry, that those lessons shape my understanding of manhood and for a more positive sense. And I just feel like that sort of impact or that sort of organization, and there's many different ones out there. If men find, I would encourage men to find those where they preach those sort of like-minded thoughts and opinions on positive impact and positive roles, whether that be through your church, whether that be through a volunteer organization, whether that be through your friend group. I would encourage all men to go out there and find that. And where you see within those organizations that there are negative examples, where to reach out to those guys to try to uplift them to act more in standard and to act better. And because I believe that's also part of masculinity is to reach back and to uplift the men around you to that standard as well. So the big reason why I wanted to talk about this was that I have many concerns, especially where this hyper focus on masculinity has led us, right? It's too many individuals spreading bad advice and toxic ideas about to impressionable young men. First off, it's too many individuals spreading bad advice and ideas to impressionable young men on what masculinity is. And we talked about this before. It's just not enough. And I don't want to say it's not enough. It's not, there's the positive impacts and the positive role models aren't loud enough to drone out the noise from the negative. First off, because I really do believe that negativity speaks a lot louder than positivity in today's world in terms of just the spread, the impact, and the social, cultural sense of who hears it. But also, I think, that men on an everyday basis see too many men in culture and their everyday life that don't act to the standard that they should. And it became to where at first it was something to look down upon or to frown upon or to distance yourself from. It started to become acceptable to act to these lower standards and to give in to these toxic behaviors and to, do things, to speak to people inappropriately or to act in ways that are not respecting yourself. And I just think that when that became so commonplace and accepted, that's where you started seeing more and more of these issues lie, because those sort of traits started then to become passed down to more people that thought they were acceptable. And then, frankly, and I hate to sound like a boomer about it, but I just think it's too much allowing men nowadays, especially in these internet spaces, to wallow in their self-pity and blame others for their lack of success. I think it's too much allowing men to feel sorry for themselves, to blame others, to say, oh, it's not my fault, or I would have been able to do this if not for this, or if this person wasn't here, I would have this, or if this wasn't here, I would have this, or, oh, woe is me, the world is wrong because of this, or no, or, I'm owed this. And I just think it's too many spaces in the internet that, one, feed bad ideas, and two, allow that sort of self-pity to fester with those bad ideas. And it just creates this really, dangerous sort of mindset for a lot of young men. And when you see a lot of these shooters and a lot of these people calling these mass violent attacks, a lot of them exhibit these sort of senses of where they believe that there's a sort of justification for, their actions, or a justification or a demonization of the world, that the world drove them to this, or that something needed to be done and they were the ones to do it, that I really feel like stem from that. And if we don't start, and we have to start addressing it, or, we see it more and more now, but I mean, I can't even say it'll become commonplace, because it's becoming commonplace now. Like, I don't even know how much more it can become at this point for us to start addressing it. And one concern I have, and again, this is coming back to women. I wasn't going to try to harp in on women specifically on this episode, but I do think you have to bring it up to a degree. I do think women have helpful notions and advice and expectations about masculinity. I want to say that first. And I do think that that should be respected and is valid. At the same time, I don't think women can tell men how to be men. And I know a lot of women say that they can't tell men and they to be men. They can't raise men to be men, and I agree. I agree, and not from like a me trying to sound like a sarcastic asshole. Like, no, I agree with the concept, and I think that, coming back to the point that women have, that still, while that's the case, that women do have helpful advice and notions and expectations that can be taken in, is because, frankly, every woman on earth has been impacted either positively or negatively by a male, in the sense of they've come across a male at some point in their life and they've drawn some sort of encounter from that, whether it was minimal, major, whether it was a dad, a neighbor, a coach, a teacher, anything, like they've come across them and they've encountered them in some either positive or negative way. And that's impacted their life in either some small or large sense, but it's done something. And so, with that being said, they all have opinions that are valid and to be respected. And I think, a lot of men have problems understanding that and respecting that, because they don't like hearing it from the sense of, oh, you can't tell me that because you're not me, type of thing. But at the same time, I do think, at the same time, I think it's also similar to when you say that I don't believe that men can tell women how to be women either. So I do think it's that reciprocal sense. But I do think at the same time we can all take from each other's experiences, each other's notions from each that we've gained from each other, or each other's personalities, and we can use that to be better people. We can still respect that, yes, at the end of the day, this woman might not be able to fully tell me how to be a man, and but at the same time, I can respect the fact that where she's coming from is how she's been, was impacted her from her relationships with men, from her family, from romantically, whatever the case may be, and understand that is a valid point, and that she may have insight from that, and from their positives or their negatives that can help, or that can help you be a better person. With that being said, it's also important to understand, and frankly, it's important to ignore women who let kind of the anger or the disregard for men form from that assessment to just that demonization, that general demonization of men. I'm not going to speak about women hating on men in this episode. I don't really think I'm going to do an episode about it either. But, I think when you come across those examples of women that just harbor that pain, and they're trying to that's their way of kind of dealing with it, then that's what you get. One thing I want to talk about is, I think men have a lot of threats against them, and it's a concern, obviously. One, I think, is online gambling. I think that is I think that came along at a time where it is representative of a lot of issues that men deal with, where it's kind of this impulsive, risky behavior, um, short term thinking, instant gratification type of stuff. And there's nothing wrong with online gambling, nothing wrong with parlays. But again, I think it's the same thing of where it has to be moderated, it has to be used. But a lot of men, especially younger men, are going into financial distress, placing large bets, money that they really can't afford to lose on bets that they either may think or secure, or ones that they think are going for big money. And they're hoping, oh, I can get rich, not thinking like, Vegas odds been going forever. Like Vegas always, is generally on top. So like that I think is a concern. And I think, those issues cause a lot of anxiety. They lead to drug use. They lead to alcoholism. They lead to depression. They lead to anger, violence. And I think in order then that, which are the key, things that lead to these toxic behaviors that impact masculinity in a negative way. And I just think that, it's something for more and more people to start taking note of, because the parlay culture is here and is in large impact, and the more people that use it, I think the negative side of it is growing silently, and without it being addressed, it's going to be a problem. um, One another threat that men are facing, um, and I mean this isn't I think this isn't a secret, but I don't think it's known enough, is an addiction to porn. I think, and it can be best summarized. I would challenge anybody to look at the movie Don John, starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt. That to me spoke about this subject. It was really ahead of its time, in my opinion, because it came out like what 20 years ago or something, almost maybe 15 years ago. Like it really spoke to this subject in a deep sense. That like the main character, I forget his name, essentially was addicted to porn, and it wasn't because of like he found that instant attraction. It was because it was a way for him to control intimacy in a way that was comfortable for him. He didn't have to communicate with a woman or talk to her or get to know her or deal with those, vulnerable moments that intimacy requires. Just whenever he felt the urge, he could watch porn, release, ejaculate, and then as soon as he was done, he could instantly insulate himself from that and turn it off. And I think that was, and it wasn't until he met this woman that he was kind of like in this pseudo relationship with. It was this lady who had just recently lost her husband and her like it was like her 8 year old son. I forget how old the son was, but her son in an accident of some sort. And they were kind of like in this pseudo relationship while she was kind of like in a grieving process. I forget where they met, how they met. It was like I forget exact specifications of the movie, but essentially, like her grieving process was essentially like this pseudo relationship with him in a sense. And during that, she was in a way trying to get him ready to trying to get like she was trying to tell him kind of how that that intimacy, all the things that it requires, and all the things that love with another human being and intimacy with another human being requires, through kind of like experiencing that, especially because she had just lost that. And by the end of the movie, like when she kind of was out of grieving process, they had broken up for the sense that she knew that, I mean, there was like 20-year age difference, so she knew that they weren't going to be able to date. But when she kind of felt like she was in a good space, they did break up, kind of mutually, I think, and where he was able to kind of be more intimately available, emotionally available, and able to kind of go into the world ready to really date and find his wife, and find love, I should say. But again, that addiction to porn was based around that way to control intimacy, and I feel like a lot of men struggle with that same problem. Is that they find intimacy in the sense of everything that comes with it, either taxing, something they don't want to do, something they can't do. And I really feel like it's like they, instead of trying to pretty much swallow the fear and the pride, and embracing that in order to achieve that goal, it's gone to that, instead of shutting down and going to the addiction to porn route, because it's just easier that way. And I think, that's just a threat again, where it messes up your idea of what sex is, your idea of what romance is, your idea of what women are, and what women, and like, I just think that porn in a general sense is not an issue, but that addiction to it has to be really assessed as a threat, and or as a problem. And I would encourage anybody to, male or female, to really assess their relationship with porn and how you view and how it has impacted your view of the world. And then the gender wars online are extremely toxic. I mean, I think we've all talked about that. I think they push these narratives of us against them when it's really everybody versus the problem. And I think it goes back to that, allowing people to find that like-minded group of wallow and self-pity, and oh no, it's their fault and they're wrong for this and they're wrong for that on both sides. And it creates this hatred and this, I don't want to listen, I just want to be right, and I'm speaking to respond, not speaking to understand or to listen. And it's not a good headspace to be in. I don't recommend any. I really wish we would leave that in the past and put that behind us. But there's a form. It's really creating a lot more of a toxic environment for men, and the idea. I mean, and it's creating a lot of a negative view of masculinity by a lot of men arguing with women so vehemently online about this, about why they're wrong, or why they're not doing what they need to do as women, or why they don't understand what men like. And it's creating such a negative that I wish it would just all stop, because it's not helping anyone. And then there always will be social pressures from women just on the dating concept. I think some of it can be unrealistic, some of it can be realistic, some of it can be respectable, some of it can be illogical. But those pressures, just to always to be the type that, to get the girl that you would like, I guess, is always going to be a social pressure that's going to add that anxiety. And, I understand that, for men that don't have a lot of luck with women, that can be a depressing thing, and that there are a lot of men that don't have a lot of intimacy with women at all. And like more than we give credit to. And so with that, I speak on that because like that can be a pressure, but a lot of times again you have to challenge those men to assess why, or what they feel like is the issue, and how they can better be situated to be more suitable, and not just suitable to any woman, but suitable to the woman that they want, and the woman that they deserve, and the woman that deserves them. And yeah, I mean, I just think it's a I understand where men like the pressure that comes from it, but yeah, it's something that you just have to kind of, it's a fact, it's a part of life almost, but I feel like most times, especially with happy couples, they come from a base of understanding, and dating comes from a base of understanding each other and patience and being, loving each other's faults and things like that. That serious dating, I mean. And when you find the woman that's right for you, then you'll know that. And so I get the social pressure from dating, but it's just evaluating how you could be more ready for that moment and more ready for the person that, you want to have that moment with. And then the last thread I wanted to talk about was just, I think there's a lot of pressure on men in terms of like the envy competition culture that kind of perpetuated from social media. And that's almost from every aspect of life, whether it's your physique, whether it's how successful you are, whether it's how smart you are, whether it's how well you are with women, whether it's how, much money you have, whether it's how in tune with God you are, whether it's anything, whether it's how good of a gamer you are, but like anything, everything now seems to be a competition within social media, or a competition that is kind of perpetuated by social media. Sorry, and I think it's important to cut that out to a degree and stop, man, realize that life isn't really a race as much as you're running your own race and not really against anybody else. And there's no competition here. And as a male, masculinity wise, if you have to be firm within yourself and what you're doing and not impacted by what the world is doing, or not in flux because of what the world is doing. And, if you can do that, then and you have that core base, then you're good, and you don't have to let that envy competition type of culture even impact you. So, like, in conclusion, right? I ain't gonna say in conclusion, but just kind of wrap it up, because I have been rambling for a while about this. There is no single type of good man. Like we talked about that, in terms of, masculinity can be positively defined by men that are come from different walks of life, different physiques, different religions, different races, different areas of the world, different priorities, different family structures, but they all speak to similar themes of integrity, love, respect, positive impact. And I think those interpersonal ideals have to be what we define masculinity by and what we judge masculinity based off of. And if men are to be leaders of society, or men are to continue to be leaders of society, as I think they're expected to be, it's important to be your best self and to leave a positive impact in the world. It's important to uplift other men, to educate and uplift other men to act in standard with what they should act with. And it's important to keep that going, and not let your fellow people or your fellow men fall down to these standards that are below par. And then lastly, I just wanted to leave off by challenging, any men listening to this to just assess yourselves and what your definition of masculinity is. If you need to take feedback from those around you, please do. If you need to seek any sort of advice from that, please do. But it's important for you to have that base and that core understanding within yourself of what masculinity means to you and what your core values, what your core priorities are. Because when you have that, it's like a brick house. Like you can't be swayed in the wind, compared to like if you had a house made of straw, and the next moment that a strong wind comes by, it all blows away. So I just challenge you all to please think of that, what brings you to that, and what you define as that core, and keep that within you everywhere you go. So again, thank you all. That's the end of the show. Again, follow me on Instagram, name RTD _ III. Facebook, I think the name is Robert Trey Davis III. I think the podcast is on Spotify. Should have some more episodes coming out soon. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate it. Peace out.